Let's learn about the HAP2 Unit 1 Part 2, which is about central nervous system. Central nervous system involves introduction, various parts and functions of the central nervous system, that which is also called CNS, reflex activity. Introduction: the central nervous system consists of brain present in the cranial cavity and the spinal cord present in the vertebral column. The spinal cord has 32 segments and the brain consists of brainstem, dicephalon, cerebellum. The nervous system is the major controlling, regulatory and communicating system in the body. Nervous system is responsible for regulating and maintaining homeostasis. Various parts of central nervous system. The central nervous system consists of brain present in the cranial cavity and the spinal cord present in the vertebral column. Brain consists of three parts: forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. And the spinal cord, second part. First part, brain. It is one of the largest organs in the body and coordinates most of the body activities. It is the center of all thoughts and memory, judgment and emotion. Each part of the brain is responsible for the controlling different types of body functions such as temperature regulation and breathing. Ventricles of brain. The ventricles of brain are communicating network of cavities filled with the cerebrospinal fluid, also known as CSF, and located within the brain parenchyma. Types of ventricles. Lateral ventricles. Lateral ventricles are the two C-shaped cavities, one on each side of the cerebral hemisphere. Third ventricle. The third ventricle is one of the four ventricles of the brain that communicates with one another. The fourth ventricle. The fourth ventricle is a cavity of hindbrain connected to the third ventricle by a narrow cerebral aqueduct. Next part, cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid, it is also known as CSF, is a clear, colorless liquid that is found in your brain and spinal cord. It fills the brain ventricles, cisterns and sulci. It also fills the central canal of the spinal cord. It is produced by the specialized epidermal cells in the choroid plexus. It is produced daily at the rate of about 25 ml per hour. The cerebrospinal fluid is primarily comprised of 99% water. It also contains small quantities of glucose, protein, sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium and chloride. Functions of cerebrospinal fluid: nutrition to the brain, source of nutrition to the brain, excretion of metabolic wastes, transport medium, control of chemical environment, auto-regulation of intracranial pressure. Parts of brain and its function. Brain consists of four parts: cerebrum, cerebellum, brainstem and dicephalon. Cerebrum divided into two parts: right cerebral hemisphere and left cerebral hemisphere. Second, cerebellum. Next, third one, brainstem. Brainstem is divided into three parts: medulla, pons and midbrain. Next, dicephalon. Dicephalon divided into three parts. First one, thalamus, hypothalamus, epithalamus and pineal gland. First part of the brain, cerebrum. Cerebrum, it is the largest section of the brain. It is located in the upper portion of the brain and the area that processes thoughts, judgment, memory, problem solving and language imaginations. The cerebrum is subdivided into left and right. Both the hemispheres are connected by a bridge of nerve fibers that relays information between two hemispheres called corpus callosum. Cerebral cortex, it is the superficial layer of the cerebrum. It is a grey matter and this is 2 to 4 millimeters thick. Called the cerebral cortex, contains billions of neurons. During embryonic development, when the brain size increases rapidly, the grey matter of the cortex enlarges much faster as deeper white matter, so also results the cortical region rolls and folds upon itself. Next, lobes of cerebrum: frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe. Frontal lobe, it is the most anterior portion of the cerebrum, which is under the forehead. The central sulcus, it separates the frontal and parietal lobe. It controls the motor function, personality, and speech, like center of reasoning, explaining, planning, some parts of the speech, movement, emotions, problem solving. It is also called motor cortex, parietal lobe, the most superior portion of the cerebrum. Then it receives and interprets nerve impulses from the sensory receptors and interprets language, receives the sensory input from the skin. It is also called as sensory cortex. Occipital lobe, it is the most posterior portion of the cerebrum, receives input from the eye and controls vision. It is also known as visual cortex. Next, temporal lobe, the left and right lateral portion of the cerebrum, controls hearing and smell. It is also called auditory cortex. The functions of the cerebrum: motor functions like control of voluntary movements, sensory functions like perception of pain, temperature, touch, hearing, taste, and smell, control of intelligence, speech, memory, and learning, etc. Occipital lobe, occipital lobe, primary visual center of the brain. It also controls the subconscious concentration of muscle. Next, second part, cerebellum. It is the largest portion of the brain, located beneath the posterior part of the cerebrum. A deep groove known as transverse fissure separates cerebrum to cerebellum, aids in coordinating voluntary body movements and maintaining balance in equilibrium. The external surface of cerebellum is called cerebellar cortex, looks like a butterfly. Constricted area called vermis. Divisions and layers of cerebellum: anterior lobe and the posterior lobe both regulate the subconscious aspects of skeletal muscle movement. Folliculonodular lobe on the inferior surface maintain equilibrium balance. Superficial layer of cerebellum called cerebellar cortex consists of grey matter, series of slender and parallel folds called foila. Deep grey matter, white matter called arborvitae, resembles to branch of a tree. Functions of cerebellum: coordinate the contractions of skeletal muscle, may play a role in cognition and learning from experiences and language processing. One of the major functions of the cerebellum is to coordinate the timing and force of these different muscle groups to produce fluid limb or body movements. Sensory input from the skin, viscera, special sense organ, and pressure relayed to the thalamus before redistribution to the cerebrum. Third part, brainstem. The brainstem is the posterior stalk-like part of the brain that connects to the cerebrum with the spinal cord. In the human brain, the brainstem is composed of midbrain, the pons, and medulla oblongata. Midbrain, the midbrain or miscephalon, extends from the pons to the dicephalon and about 2.5 centimeters long. It acts as a pathway of our impulses to be conducted between the brain and the spinal cord, which is associated with vision, hearing, motor control, sleep or awake, arousal, alertness, and temperature regulation. Anterior part of the midbrain called cerebral pedunculus and posterior part called tectum. Functions of midbrain. The midbrain serves important functions in motor movement, particularly movements of eye, and in auditory visual processing. Dopamine produced in the substania nigra and ventral tegmental area plays a role in excitation and motivation. The midbrain helps to relay information for vision and hearing. Pons. Pons means bridge. Connects the cerebellum to the rest of the brain. Like medulla, it is also a sensory tract and motor tract. It contains nuclei, deals with the respiration, swallowing, bladder control, hearing, equilibrium, eyeball movements, facial expressions, etc. Functions of pons: relays sensory information to the cerebellum, connects forebrain to hindbrain, regulates breathing, involved in control of sleep cycle. Medulla oblongata, lowermost part of the brain stem and continuation of the superior portion of spinal cord, situated at the base of the skull or starts from the foramen magnum and extends to the inferior border of pons at a distance about 3 cm. The ascending and descending sensory and motor white matter tracts or nerves connecting brain to the spinal cord passes through medulla oblongata. Functions of medulla oblongata: it plays an essential role in passing messages between your spinal cord and brain. The cardiovascular center regulates the heart rate, force of heartbeat, and diameter of blood vessels. The medullary rhythmicity center, responsible for maintaining basic rhythm of breathing. The vasomotor center regulates the blood pressure. Others: vomiting, swallowing, cough, hiccuping, and sneezing, etc. 5 pairs of cranial nerves originates from the nuclei located in medulla oblongata. Fourth one, dicephalon. Dicephalon is posterior part of the forebrain that connects the midbrain with the cerebral hemisphere. Next, thalamus. Thalamus means the inner room in Greek, as it sits deep inside the brain at the top of the brainstem. The thalamus is called the gateway of the cerebral cortex, as nearly all the sensory inputs pass through it to the higher levels of the brain. Important relay station for all incoming sensory nerves from periphery or spinal cord, with different impulses of pain, temperature, touch, pressure, and are conveyed to the thalamus first, then go to the cerebrum. Median geniculate nucleus related to the hearing. Second, lateral geniculate nucleus related to the vision. Third one, ventral posterior nucleus related to the taste and somatic sensations like touch, pain, pressure, cold, heat and vibrations, etc. Hypothalamus. The hypothalamus sits under the thalamus at the top of the brainstem. Although the hypothalamus is small and it controls the many critical bodily functions, the hypothalamus is a portion of a brain that contains a number of small nuclei with a variety of functions. The functions of hypothalamus. One of the most important functions of the hypothalamus is to link the nervous system to the endocrine system via the pituitary gland, controls the autonomic nervous system, regulates the body temperature, regulates the food intake and controls endocrine system, regulates water balance and thirst and controls sleep-wake cycles. Controls CVS regulation, heart rate and BP. The hypothalamus is shaded in blue color. The pituitary gland extends from the hypothalamus. Next, epithalamus and pineal gland. Epithalamus is a smaller region, superior and posterior to the thalamus. It consists of pineal gland. The pineal gland is about the size of a pea and protrudes from the posterior midline of the third ventricle. It's an endocrine gland, secretes hormone melatonin. Darkness stimulates the pineal gland to secrete melatonin. It promotes sleepiness. Functions of epithalamus and pineal gland. The function of epithalamus is to connect the limbic system to the other parts of the brain. The main function of the pineal gland is to receive and convey information about the high current light or dark cycle from the environment and subsequently secrete melatonin cyclically at night. Effector. It is a part of the body that responds to the motor nerve impulses such as muscle or gland. Its action is called as reflex. The effector is skeletal muscle. The reflex is called somatic reflex. The effector is smooth muscle, cardiac muscle or gland. The reflex is called autonomic reflex. Second one, spinal cord. The spinal cord is a long bundle of nerves and cells which extends from the lower portion of the brain to the lower back. It carries signals between the brain and the rest of the body. External anatomy of spinal cord. External anatomy of spinal cord involves cervical enlargement, lumbar enlargement, posterior root or dorsal root, anterior root or ventral root. Cervical enlargement. The superior enlargement extends from the fourth cervical vertebrate to the first thoracic vertebrate. Nerves to from Nerves to and from the upper limbs arises from the cervical enlargement, lumbar enlargement. Inferior enlargement extends from the 9th to the 12th thoracic vertebrae. Nerves to and from the lower limbs arise from the lumbar enlargement. Posterior or dorsal root. The dorsal or sensory root contains sensory nerve fibers which conducts the nerve impulses from periphery to the spinal cord. Anterior root or ventral root. The ventral root or motor root contains motor neurons conducting nerve impulses from the spinal cord to the periphery. Next, internal anatomy of spinal cord. Anterior median fissure, deep groove on anterior ventral side. Posterior median sulcus, shallower groove on posterior side. Anterior or ventral horns. The somatic motor nuclei provide nerve gray impulsor for contraction of skeletal muscle. Posterior or dorsal gray horns. It contains somatic or autonomic sensory nuclei. Anterior ventral white columns, posterior dorsal white columns, lateral white columns. Division of spinal nerves. Cervical nerves in 8 pairs, thoracic nerves which is in 12 pairs, lumbar nerves which are in 5 pairs, sacral nerves 5 pairs, coccygeal nerves which is a pair. Functions of efferent and efferent nerve tracts. Autonomic sensory neuron efferent. These neurons are associated with the interoceptors which are sensory receptors located in the blood vessels and visual organs. Muscle sensory neurons are responsible for receiving information from the sensory receptors into the central nervous system. Autonomic motor neuron efferent. These regulate visceral activity by either increasing or decreasing ongoing activities in the effector tissues. The autonomic nervous system is divided into two divisions: sympathetic, parasympathetic, thoracic lumbar outflow, craniosacral outflow divisions. This system is further divided into two branches, the sympathetic system and the parasympathetic system. The sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system regulates flight or fight responses. Parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system helps in maintaining normal body functions and conserves the physical resources. The two divisions have both the structure and functional differences. They normally work in opposite manner. Each division has two motor neurons, autonomic ganglia and effector organs, preganglionic neuron, postganglionic neuron. The autonomic ganglionic is the collection of the cell bodies outside the CNS. Next, reflex activity. A reflex is a flat, autonomic, unplanned sequence of actions that occurs in response to a particular stimulus. When an integration takes place in a spinal cord, gray matter, the reflex is called the spinal reflex. If integration occurs in brainstem, it is called cranial reflex. When there is a contraction of skeletal muscle, it is called somatic reflexes. When there is a contraction in smooth muscles, cardiac muscle and glands, it is known as autonomic reflex. The pathway followed by nerve impulses that produce reflex is called as reflex arc. A reflex arc includes the following 5 functional components: sensory receptors, sensory neuron, integrating center, motor neuron, effector. For more details, follow our channel Pharma Pro EDU.